Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Formula E Zone podcast. I think we're on episode 11 now, and today we'll be reviewing the Bern E-Prix and looking at the major talking points. Now, there was definitely quite a few talking points that we'll be getting into in this podcast, but with me today, as always, from eFormLD, is Tobias Bloom.
Hey ho! Thanks for having me on once again. How are you,
right.
Jack? Happy birthday, first of all. Happy birthday
Thank
to
you.
you.
We are recording this on my birthday. I know. Another year goes. The time's just flying. Time's just flying.
How old are you now?
How
old are you now? 12?
How old am I now? I probably sound like a 12-year-old. That's probably true. I probably act like an 8-year-old. But 24. 24. 24 now.
That old.
Getting old. Nearly a quarter of a century. One more year to go. But anyway, moving on. But thank you so much for that. Bern E-Prix. Like, where do we start? I'll tell you where we'll start. We'll start with qualifying. We'll get qualifying out the way. Because qualifying, it was a pretty standard qualifying session. But there was some really interesting things that came out of it. Especially from Group 1. Because we had Verne, who was in Group 1, who did a stellar lap. I think, we were talking about in the last podcast that, it might not be Verne's weekend. It's, a championship where, Bern's a new race. It's everything could be up in the air. And what happens? Verne says, don't be silly. I've got this. And he puts in a 3 attempts clear in Group 1 than the rest. And it was really important because then you had De Grassi and Da Costa, who were, remember, in this fight for this championship going into qualifying and needing that good result, really and truly needing to out-qualify Jean-Eric Vergne. And they just don't get a lap together at all. I think they were 8 attempts off Jean-Eric Vergne and starting towards the back of the grid, whereas Jean-Eric Vergne made it through to Superpole.
Amazing, right? Yeah, Jean-Eric Vergne made it through to Superpole. In the end, he qualified on pole position. And we had Lucas De Grassi, the other major championship player in qualifying Group 1, starting from P19. We had Antonio Felix da Costa, also not the biggest championship protagonist this year, but he started from P20, and it didn't look good for those guys, but especially we were all surprised by Jean-Eric Vergne, obviously, because getting out of Group 1 into Superpole is a major achievement, and then under pressure from very, very fast guys as well. Evans qualified for Superpole, Buemi, Wehrlein and Bert qualified for Superpole, along with someone else we're having to talk about. And, what I'm saying is these guys really are competitive and very quick on a hot lap. Jesus Christ, did you hear that?
Yeah, I did.
Apologies about that. So these guys were very quick on a hot lap. And
just like that person.
Yeah, just like that person. I have no idea what happened out here outside my window. Yeah, but beating them in qualifying is very good from Verne. And there was the other guy I didn't want to mention at first. Do you know who he was?
Who, that person that you mentioned? I think it was the one and only Maxi Gunther.
He was, yeah. Very quick all day. I was really surprised by his pace. Not really Pichito's pace. He was the average driver again in Bern, but Max Gunther really surprised me with his pace. Been lightning quick in practice sessions already. He finished FP1 and P7 and FP2 in, let me lie about this, P13. Not the best result, but he qualified for Superpole.
But it's only practice.
It's only practice, and he might have had some traffic on his lap. I can't really remember that. But he was very quick all day and showed that again in qualifying and qualifying for Superpole. Ultimately ended up starting the race from P5.
Yeah, it was a great job. It's amazing really to think how he was dropped earlier in the season by Dragon. Considering since he's come back, he's been a completely... Well, to be fair, at the beginning of the season, and maybe it's more credit to Dragon car that it wasn't really that great, but obviously Dragon have moved forward with their car, and Gunther's really moved forward with it, and obviously he missed those races mid-season when Felipe Nasr came in, and, a driver like Felipe Nasr is a very good driver, he's very talented, but coming into a season midway through, he didn't really shine, really struggled. didn't take to the championship like the likes of Oliver Rowland and Pascal Wehrlein. So I feel like even with rookies now, you don't have time to bed into the championship anymore like Felipe Nasr did. But whereas Maxi Gunther, to be fair, since he's come back, has been brilliant, and he's been on this race by race basis, and I'm sure he's in for the rest of the season. But if he's not signed up for Dragon next season, like, there's a really good race driver out there.
He is arousing interest from other teams, though. I know for a fact from a source within the team that he has been not the least popular of drivers on the driver market, and of course Dragon are possibly looking to re-signing him, but he had interest from other teams going into season 6 as well, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens to his ambitions and his contract next year. But as you say, he's really improved a lot this year. Thinking back to his first race at Diriyah, and then being dropped by the team halfway through the season for Felipe Nasr, who we haven't heard a word of in the meantime, apart from in IMSA, obviously. But it's ever since he's been back, Max has been improving a lot, and this last weekend only shows how much he's improved. And very, very great. Well, it was an application for next year, was it?
100%. It was like a drive. Well, to be fair, he's been driving as if he's been in the shop window ever since he's been back. Because I feel like, well, depending on what teams are moving on from drivers and what drivers are deciding to leave the series, then if there are openings, which we know there are in a couple of places, potentially Audi, how amazing could that be for him?
Oh yeah.
He's been driving as if he needs to secure a drive for next season, and he's doing everything that he needs to be doing. So I'm just going to run down quickly the rest of the qualifying. So we had Mitch Evans in that Jaguar again in second place. That Jaguar just finding one lap pace and improving, and maybe Jaguar for season 6 could be a team now that we could see it more at the front of the field with Mitch. Buemi doing a great job for P3. Pascal Wehrlein coming back, so a new track where everything's sort of a bit more equal, and Pascal Wehrlein's back where I think he should be, P4. And then we had obviously Gunther in P5 and Sam Bird in P6. Did make a mistake on his flying lap, but that was your top 6. Anything you want to mention else from qualifying?
Because nothing happened. Literally nothing happened apart from good laps from Gunther and Verne. Apart from that, even in practice, I was expecting one or the other yellow flag situation, or maybe even a red flag, because the circuit in Bern really was tight and narrow. But pretty much nothing happened in practice or in qualifying. So fair enough. Good on them. I don't have that much to add to qualifying, and I think we can head straight into the race.
I think Lotterer and Robin Freins, the other two drivers in the championship fight going into the race, we're in the back end of the top 10, like in 8th and 9th, going into race. But that's sort of qualified. Now the race start. This is where it gets interesting, as obviously everyone knows, listening to the podcast, and probably why everyone's here to probably actually listen to the podcast. So let's get straight into it. First corner, cars get away. Amazingly, they go flying down the hill, and then we come to that turn 13, 14 chicane, and mayhem strikes.
That was to be expected, to be honest, though.
Yeah.
What's your take?
The first thing I'm going to say. So this is what happened. Let's just tell everyone, just to remind everyone what happened. So basically, it was the tiniest of touches. So Evans and Verne got through, but Buemi, trying to avoid Evans or not collide into Evans, was more of a acute angle into the first part of the corner, and then had to swing. Wehrlein sort of put his nose in or was a little bit alongside, but they touched. Now it was the faintest of touches, it wasn't a touch that was significant, and massively. It did turn Wehrlein's car a little bit, and that turned Wehrlein's car into the Tech Pro barrier. Now, with the track in Bern being so narrow, that caused the roadblock. So my question to you, and this is what I put on Twitter as well, I felt that the Tech Pro barrier, the only reason we had that red flag, was simply because there was a Tech Pro barrier there instead of a bollard or some sausage curbs that we could have cut. You could argue that it was a bit narrow, but I think the Tech Pro barrier caused that red flag. If it wasn't there, Vergne would have either escaped across the curb or hit the sausage curb and carried on. And, there might have been a bit of argy-bargy at the back, but I don't think we would have had a red flag.
That's a good thought, actually. Yeah. I think we would have seen people not trying to cut, but we would have had the race director trying to manage people cutting across the circuit then. Difficult to tell, and I still feel like we should talk about circuit design and track design, because not only the turn 12, 13, 14 chicane, but also the area around turns... That's not turn 7, turn... Oh, hang on one second. Turn 9. Should be turn 9, 10, and 11. These last couple of corners, they were narrow. And...
Yeah, you couldn't pass through there. It was set up to have like a pass there. Like, it was on long straight, but it was just, you could never get a car side by side. Or if you got a car side by side, you had to get your elbows out and actually touch the side pod of the other car.
Yeah, and that's not the only location on the circuit as well. On the track map, it looked as if we had plenty of overtaken opportunities. Maybe turn 1 even, maybe turn 3, maybe turn 7, and then turns 9 and 12 as well. But they didn't really turn out to be too great for overtaking, because obviously they were a lot narrower than we all expected them to be. So I would argue that the turn 1 incident maybe is in part to blame, because we had a wall there, and that all of that could have been avoided if people had just the opportunity to cut across the chicane. But it's also down to the design of the corners, and it's difficult because that obviously is the first corner after the start straight. So theoretically, you could argue that you could just simply move the start straight to another place on the circuit, but that was very difficult as well. Then you could argue, let's just take the chicane out, which would be a sensible argument, but then the start-finish straight would be so long that turn 1 would be very clumsy indeed. Yep, not really sure what to do about it. Maybe taking the Tech Pro out would have been a solution to avoid the incident on lap 1, but it still would have been very close and very... not really sure what the right word for it is.
I'm not saying that we wouldn't have had a red flag, because we then had the Frines incident as well, with Jerome D'Ambrosio hitting Frines and Frines coming across the track and in a recovery vehicle, and it might have been easier to have thrown a red flag and restart the race to clear that collision. That could have easily been a red flag, or we could have easily have had a safety car in that period. But what I'm trying to get at is that previous Formula E have done this before, where they've had the bollard, the sausage curb, even back into season 1, Beijing, they had a long straight and it had just had 2 quick chicanes. There was no Tech Pro barriers to separate those chicanes. It was just sausage curbs. In Alexander de Platz, in the turn after the hairpin, that chicane was bollard and sausage curbs. Putrajaya was also bollard, sausage curbs. Long Beach was sausage curbs and bollards. So there's a theme that we did have chicanes with sausage curbs and bollards, and they did work. We did see cars cutting the track, but we have decided, and it's popped up in quite a few Formula E tracks, is that we've now put in a Tech Pro barrier. So that means, think Mexico, for example, with the last corner, there's a Tech Pro barrier there, and that it's a bit wider, of course, it's because it's a normal track, but there's a Tech Pro barrier there. And it's a real narrow bit. So if you get that wrong, you have to get it's probably as narrow as the Bern Street to stop that car and go through after the Tech Pro barrier. So we've begun to introduce those Tech Pro barriers, and just looking at it, and it was a recipe for disaster, because one incident, it doesn't matter. It didn't even matter if it was the first corner. Someone could have just outbraked themselves by themselves, hit that barrier and cause a road blockage, and we would have had to red flag it for an incident, for example. So say, like, I don't know, I'm not going to say a Formula E driver's name, but someone could have easily locked up and caused a roadblock, and we would have had to red flag the session because you had to recover that car.
Yep.
So whoever did the risk assessment for that corner should really really look at themselves and go, how on earth did I create such a monstrosity?
And especially it being the first turn after the start as well. People were okay with it on one lap runs, and we didn't see any incidents whatsoever in practice or qualifying in it. Maybe a couple of lockups, but that's okay. You can just cut the chicane because the attack probe wasn't connected to the outside barrier of the circuit. It was just there in the middle of the road, so that it
was a deterrent.
Yeah.
I know it's supposed to act as a deterrent.
Yep.
But yeah, as you're saying, with the first corner, you can't. It's just used as a recipe for disaster.
Yep. We're not going back to Bern, so we won't have to talk about that topic for too long, though.
We're never going to do this again.
We're not going to do this
everyone.
again.
We've lived and learned. We knew before the calendar, when the calendar was released for the last episode, we knew we weren't going back. So it was like, we've lived and learned. We know it's not going to work, so we just won't go back.
Yeah, and especially Bern really wasn't too... I mean, I don't want to say Bern wasn't too friendly to Formula E, because in the end we had 130,000 people turning up in the E-Village throughout the event. Obviously, everyone passing through the streets is counted as a visitor of Formula E, so that has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But the official number is 130,000 visitors. But all was, overshadowed a bit by protesters on Thursday night.
What do you think? You were there. You were in Bern. We haven't even mentioned that you were actually there.
Yeah, by the way, I was in Bern.
You were in Bern. You saw the protests.
Yep.
Like, just moving on quickly as a side note. What were they? I know what they were about, but like, explain to the viewers, like, what were they about? Why were they doing it, and so forth?
Yeah, the thing is, the circuit was in part leading around a very crowded, just area where people live. They had their homes there. I think 2 or 3 schools were within the infield of the circuit. So obviously residents weren't happy about it. And Bern apparently is a very popular place for students to go, and so the Bern is one of the rather leftist towns in Switzerland, and apparently it was a very political thing having Formula E there, and residents complain about obviously having their everyday lives being disrupted. There were complaints about, or there were question marks about whether Formula E really is that sustainable as they say, because when we build up race circuits, and I can see where they're coming from, most of the time the circuits aren't being built with electric vehicles. There are diesel lorries bringing all the barriers to the circuit, and basically it's just a lot of emissions that are being set out even before the race starts. And people were complaining about that, and it turned into a very political thing. And there was an organization, they were involved in last year's Zurich Prix as well, and were part of the protest against it. Very... I mean, I can understand their frustration, because I wouldn't want... I mean, I would want it because it's Formula E, but as the average Joe, I wouldn't really want to have my everyday life disrupted by it as well. By any major event, even marathons, they are annoying and all of that. But the worst thing of all is not the protests and not them riding their bicycles through Bern, protesting against Formula E. They actually destroyed most of the advertisement banners, track signs, the stuff you put on the walls, and they cut through, not really sure what type of cables, but word on the street was it was TV cables and timing cables, and that all resulted in total damages of 400,000 Swiss francs, which is around 380 euros, I think. 360 euros, and let me just quickly Google that.
I think that would be about 340.
Yeah, 323,000 pounds in the UK.
323,000. Okay, not as much. Not as the exchange rate is not as bad as I think.
But still, and that kind of overshadowed all of Thursday and Friday. Not really not really necessary for them to do that. I see their frustration, but there are better ways to protest against major events in your city.
It reminds me of London, because I remember I was very heavily involved with the London protest, and when you mentioned about obviously like the diggers and stuff and the lorries and how many there were, I remember seeing it at Battersea Park. There was tons.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you're just like, I know Formula E, and I know Formula E's financial situation isn't, currently the healthiest technically, but I feel like should Formula E be doing something to progress like lorries and making them and building up lorries that are more energy efficient?
They are, yeah.
So they can use those lorries.
Yep.
But I don't think Formula E currently has the money to do that, and the technology isn't there yet. I think once the technology is there to make some sort of electric lorry, Formula E will be there, and it will be there to, say, okay, look, we are energy efficient, we're doing as much as we can.
Yep.
But until that technology is there to actually make a sort of an electric lorry, electric diggers, so they're not fuel guzzlers, then there isn't much Formula E can do about that, which is the difficult thing. And I understand the protest, and that's as I said before, when Formula E deciding city locations, there's always going to be, no matter what city we go to, no matter how much a city is really interested in hosting a race, there's always going to be people who are like, I don't want this.
Of course, yeah.
It's because it's not, we don't see, well, you do, but really and truly, when you watch a race on a Saturday, the average fan doesn't see the 3-week build-up to put that race together of bridges, because you have to make the bridges for people to walk over. You've got to make the advertising boards, that barriers have got to come in, roads have got to close, and you don't see that 3-week period, which, I think you saw when we were in Berlin for Alexanderplatz. I saw in London for Battersea Park, and even though Battersea Park was inside a park, but the amount of lorries and construction and, bits that were blocked off, park being blocked off to people, and, little tiny sections only being available in a park in central London. Just, it did seem mad. But, yeah, again, like you said, I loved it because it was Formula E. It was in my back garden, technically.
Yep.
But to a lot of people who don't like motorsport, that's annoying and invading in a sense.
And especially
I think we've touched on that.
Especially in Switzerland. Let me just add in this one more point. Especially in Switzerland, people seemed, maybe that's just me being German, but people seemed very peculiar about racing in general, because obviously they didn't have any motorsports in Bern for 60 years. And when I spoke to protesters, they were gathering on Parliament Square. So Bern it's not really the official capital city of Switzerland. It's all very weird. They don't have an official capital written down in their constitution, but their parliament is in Bern, so it's technically still the capital city. And they were gathering on Parliament Square, and when I spoke to a couple of them, they were just, of course, arguing against all the construction going on in their back garden, but also against motorsport in general, because they are not used to it. They felt motorsport was unsafe, they felt motorsport was unnecessary, and that's been just a general general disapproval of racing, and but still, I think we've talked about it all.
Yeah, it's become a culture in Switzerland that racing isn't, ever since the Le Mans incident all the way back in the 50s, it's like, it's just become a culture, and you're asking people to change their culture, and being told something for so long and then to change it one afternoon, it can be a bit crazy. Right, lovely sidetrack though, but let's get back on to the red flag incident. Because, okay, so we talked about the track layout and, Tech Pro barrier, but then we had this really weird incident where, because it really and truly was sparked by Da Costa and De Grassi not doing any fault of their own, because obviously they've gone through the mayhem, so they've avoided the bit at the back, they've avoided Frines and Da Costa coming together, they've avoided that. They can't take to the part that's blocked off, so they've taken the only usable bit of track, which is that little bit where you stop and you go.
Right.
And I think this is where I have an issue, is that it was clear it was a red flag situation. Clear as day. the track was blocked. It took them about 30 seconds, 35 seconds to throw a red flag. And that's where this argument came of, well, we've done nearly a full lap. Like, surely we must have crossed. They hadn't crossed the timeline, but that's where the driver was saying, well, I was eighth. I've been eighth for 35 seconds. I didn't crash. I just went through the safe bit that I could go through, and went through and carried on the race. Like, how did we not cross a timing line? Because it took so long for the red flag to actually come out. So, because the Grassi and the Costa had moved from their low starting point of 19th and 20th into P8 and P9, and they needed those desperate points and they needed to catch up, but they were relegated back. So what the FIA decided to do was to revert, which was also sensible. I'm not saying it wasn't sensible, but and with no timing line being there, it seemed like the only logical thing to do. But that relegated them back to 18th and 19th, so they lost those 10 positions. So Tobias, what did you think about the restart situation?
Absolutely the correct decision to go for the starting order. And I'll tell you why. Because obviously it took a reasonably long time for the race direction to communicate with each other, and with the marshal post and all of that took some time. And we had the red flag being thrown around 30 seconds after the incident occurred. And there are, and you have to keep that in mind, 11 timing beams around the circuit. So we don't have just these 3 sectors we always hear about. In fact, there are 12 sectors with 11 timing lines in between. Does that make sense? Is that 11 or 12 sectors then?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. 100%.
Right.
I'm with you. I hope everyone else is.
And you have to cross any of these timing lines so that the race direction has an idea of where these cars are. Thing is, in the rules and the regulations of Formula E, it is clearly stated that all data, or that the race director has to go back once a red flag is thrown to the order he had of all cars before the incident happened. And that just wasn't the case. So you had around, maybe 10 to 15 cars go across some timing line, one of these 11 timing beams, after the incident. They all cut across the chicane, and I think the first timing line, it was the first timing line, was obviously the starting line, and we still had the starting grid order then. And the second timing beam was on the finish line, which was right after the chicane, because the start and finish line had been offset just because of the pit lane not fitting onto that straight of the start line. Very weird, but by the regulations, you have to have the timing line of being... Oh, very weird. Too much timing, too many lines. You have to have the finish line in between pit in and pit out. So let's just boil it down to these simple few pointers. First timing line, the starting line. Second timing line, the finish line. And the race director needed to have data of all cars to reset the grid and reshuffle the grid. Thing is, the moment he threw the red flag, 8 cars didn't cross or 7 cars, not sure about that. So 7 or 8 cars didn't pass the finish line. So he had data of 15 cars or 14 cars, but he didn't have data of all cars. And that's the only reason we couldn't go back to any reshuffled order. Had the incident happened in turn 1, so that left-hander after the finish line and after the chicane, had it happened there, we would have seen a new order for the restart. But the last point the race direction had data available from all cars was the race start. And that's the reason we went back to the starting order. And in my eyes, that's absolutely correct and the only reasonable way of going about things. Having said that, I of course understand Lucas Di Grassi and Pachito Lopez and Antonio Felix da Costa and Felipe Massa all complaining about it with their South American temperament. Obviously, apart from Felix da Costa, of course. But I understand their frustration about it because some of them were in the championship hunt and were fighting for the title before Bern. I'd argue some of them are not after Bern, so I understand their frustration. And they were lashing out against the race direction even after the race on Twitter and in the media pen and all of that. It was very wild after the race, in fact.
It was great drama.
It was great drama.
It felt like a soap. I know, like, that's a really weird thing to say on a podcast, but there's like a soap is like a episode. Like, I think many people may have heard of EastEnders, but it just felt like that. Everyone just moaning, shouting, "I can't believe you're doing this. You're rubbish. You're wrong." It was just great. It was great. It was great TV. I loved it.
Sounds more like Love Island, though.
Oh yeah, it's a Love Island. I mean, that's like a soap in itself, and that's more relatable, I suppose, than EastEnders. But anyway, moving on. Yeah, it was great, but I do agree it was probably the most correct way to do it, and it's just I get the driver's point, as you say, but rules are rules, regulations are regulations. Maybe it's something they could look at. It would have been fun to have Degrassi in 8th, and that maybe at least keep the title fight alive, because with Bern being so hard to overtake, which we'll get onto now, like, getting through the field for DaCosta and Degrassi to keep their championship hopes alive were basically nil. So that qualifying session that they had ruined their championship chances of in the final 2 races in New York. But I think what really the main crux of the race came down to, and also I want to sort of mention that the Bern circuit for me reminded me of Bathurst. It was really narrow, as we've been talking about, but it was quite flowing and it had a real good rhythm to it. And I actually really enjoyed watching the cars battle it out through the street. So I know we talk about track design and the narrowness of it, and obviously Formula E probably couldn't do too much about that, but I really enjoyed watching it just as the flow of a circuit. I thought it was really good. It's a shame that we're not going back. I know it's probably too narrow, and it's probably good that we're not going back in that sense, but I really enjoyed the race. But the main crux of the race really was Jean-Eric Vergne out in front, and Mitch Evans, this Jaguar, has just come out. Well, I say come out of nowhere, it's won a race, but it sort of came out of nowhere to win that race and sort of fell away again. Now it's back, and it was back with. It was arguably the quickest race car. You could maybe say Vergne wasn't pushing it too much, not taking any risk for the championship, being in the lead, had nothing to lose, just needed to park the car on the apex. But you could argue that Mitch Evans had the fastest car all weekend.
I wouldn't say all weekend, but in the race, he was much quicker than Jeff.
Which, he was, but then you don't expect it. Like, I still, for me, when I think of Jaguar fighting for race wins, I'm like, it's like seeing Red Bull challenge for race wins. You don't expect it. Even though they're a quick car, you're like, wow, they're doing it. It's like it mind boggles you for a minute, but then you realise that once they've got a car to do it, they're like, they can do it. And I'll tell you what, Mitch did everything right, and I think Bern again with the track layout, attack mode was Evans' best chance, and the great thing for him was that he didn't lose any time taking attack mode, which probably on this track worked. I'm a big advocate for making sure attack mode actually loses you time, but on a track that was this narrowed, and by the time you've caught up, you've run out of time using attack mode, and you've got nowhere to overtake anyway. So at least you had that chance, and he tried to undercut Vergne twice with his attack modes, but there was just no way through.
It was very difficult to overtake him, and we touched on that earlier, and it just was the case of it being very difficult to overtake him. But it was possible. We've seen Lucas de Grassi, and we talked about him a bit earlier, and his starting position, remember, he started the race from P19. He ended up finishing in P9, so he overtook 10 cars, although in fairness he got gifted 2 positions because one was penalised, the other one retired, but still, Lucas de Grassi did a fantastic job in Bern and showed that it is possible to overtake. What isn't possible, though, is to overtake Jean-Eric Vergne in Bern, because he was amazing once again. He just didn't have the quickest car of all. In my opinion, Mitch Evans was the best driver on Saturday, and he thoroughly deserved the win. But it's just
if you overtook it, did you?
It's just very difficult to overtake in Bern, and I'd just put it down to the design of the corners once again, it being too narrow and having too few overtaken real overtaken opportunities. If the race happened in, I don't know, Berlin or New York, the rounds before or after Bern, Evans would have won the race, without a question. I mean, the outside would have been different, I know that, but on that day, Mitch Evans was a lot quicker than Vergne, and he would have won the race if it all happened on another circuit.
To be fair though, he did get close.
Very close.
The run up the hill, and but as I said, it was Vergne just defended. He knew where to put the car, which was the most important thing, because Vergne was trying around the outside of that fast. I think it's turn 3, going up the hill.
Turn 4.
Then it goes downhill into that little left-hander when they go up the hill again towards turn 6. So turn 3 into turn 4, maybe turn 5, then turn 6 at the top.
Yeah.
So you felt like he was going, but it was just always going to get squeezed out. You felt like there was enough room. The only time, and especially with attack mode looked like it was the only way to overtake, because having that extra bit of energy, and maybe if it was 35 kilowatts, maybe if it was that extra 10 kilowatts that it would be in season 6, that could have been enough just to get him alongside and actually make Vergne back out of it, going up that hill, because he got so close, and especially into turn 6 as well, because he was like on the inside. Maybe if he had that extra 10 kilowatts, that could have been enough to put his nose a bit more, make Vergne go, okay, I've got to give him space.
Or maybe even down that hill into turn 3. We saw Sam Birch pull off an amazing overtake on Max Günther there. Possibly the best move we've ever seen in the history of Formula E. The other one I'm thinking of was Bern again in Mexico City a couple of years ago, also around the outside, but his move on Günther into turn 3 was amazing. So it was possible to overtake there. And you're right, maybe with 10 extra
and that's
kilowatts.
That's what I love about these narrow tracks. Yep. Okay, that's what I really love, is that when you see an overtaking move, yes, they're narrow, but you're so unexpected and they're so brilliant that it makes the whole race worthwhile in a sense. You just like you've got that moment of just wow, and that's what I like at some tracks. Like, I don't want every race to have really good overtaking moves and there's guaranteed overtaking moves. Obviously, that's great for the show and great for the sport as well, because you do want overtaking. You don't want processional races, like we sort of saw in Bern. But when we saw that overtake, we were like, wow.
Yeah.
And I feel like you need that in motorsport sometimes.
That's been arguably my move of the season, if not the best move I've ever seen in the history of the sport.
Because it gave you that wow moment, and I just feel like you want some corners, and again, it's building up. We were talking about it earlier, about iconic. There we go, iconic tracks, but iconic corners. Like, there's corners around the world which are iconic. Maggots, Beckett's, Eau Rouge, corners that make you go wow when you're watching a car. And again, we're formally building these street tracks. You want maybe one day to find an iconic corner where you just go wow. If you do something there, that's just brilliant. Like, it just shows how good of a driver you are. And obviously, it's really early days for Formula E to do something like that. And obviously, with races switching around, and it becomes difficult building up an iconic corner. But I feel like that had a chance to maybe even become something like an iconic corner, because it was it was quick and it provided a chance to overtake, and if you got it right, it was going to be spectacular.
Absolutely, yeah. Have you heard about the St. Moritz rumour today? We would see a corner similar to that. So the Swiss E-Prix always was supposed to switch towns, and for 2020 it was supposed to be going back to Zurich, but we didn't find any Swiss E-Prix on the Season 6 draft calendar last week, and we're already wondering about what happened to the race, and as it turns out, Zurich didn't give the permission to build a racetrack there. Plan was to have the circuit go around the university campus in Zurich, but they felt that the changes that would have been necessary weren't sustainable enough for the campus, and they decided not to allow the construction of any racetrack, and that was the last chance for FE, basically, the campus. and now Zurich didn't give permission for anything, so we're not going to Zurich. And today, it turns out, the village of St. Moritz, which is a very, very popular winter sports site, very popular for, I think it's downhill skiing in St. Moritz, or ski jumping. I'm really bad in winter sports.
Yeah,
one of those alpine things the Swiss do. So pretty much a village of 5,000 people, and they were saying that they are willing to offer, and I'm quoting the mayor of St. Moritz here, offer asylum to Formula E.
Okay.
And we would see fantastic corners there, because obviously it's very, very
if it's
mountainous there.
which I'm thinking it is, then you're set for some good corners and possibly a really good racetrack.
Yeah,
but it'd be interesting to see how that might affect. But again, that's again about thinking about how that affects the local area, and also, we're hearing Budapest, we're hearing city after city after city after city wanting to be part of Formula E. You can't have everyone on there, so it'd be interesting to see what happens. I think that's one to keep an eye on.
I feel like I digressed a bit on that.
Wait, it's fine, but you know what I mean. It's just like, it's great that another city in Switzerland wants the race, but then so many other people want an opportunity to be on the Formula E calendar, like Budapest, that keeps growing and growing and growing every couple of months when you hear about it. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's on the season 7 calendar.
Wouldn't surprise me as well, no. And St. Moritz, that's 12 months away, a very short time frame to actually pull off the race.
Exactly.
So take that.
So it'd be interesting, but it's been done before, so I think that's just one you have to wait and see. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to wrap up really the race result, because as we said, it was really tight to overtake, so there actually wasn't that much overtaking towards the top end of the field, apart from that Sam Bird, Pascal Wehrlein incident. So we had Jean-Eric Vergne coming home to take victory in Bern and basically put one hand on this title, with Mitch Evans coming through in seconds. Obviously, what I just realised, which I haven't mentioned, the race towards the end got a bit sketchy for Vergne, and he didn't take any risks with the rain coming down, but he managed to pull it off, okay, because it really got a bit nervous towards the end with that fight, didn't it?
It was very sketchy in the end, yeah. With the rain coming down as well, it was very, very close in the last 2.5 laps. And the rain reminded me a bit of Spa, where in some parts of the track it was raining and in others it was not. I spoke to a couple of people after the race, and they were standing in turn 1 and saying it's bone dry out here. How are we seeing on the big screens that it's rainy in the other side on the other side of the track? But that's, I don't know, almost a kilometer away from where they were standing. So some parts of the circuit were very wet, and some parts weren't.
Yeah, turn 9, 7, that area, 7, that was really wet. It was really
absolutely, yeah,
like unbelievably heavy rain, like we saw in Paris.
Yep. And on the other hand, the area around the chicane where we had the lap 1 incident, then turn 1, turn 2, the downhill section, that was dry in the beginning, but wet, then turned wet very quickly. So the conditions were changing all the time, and that's very dangerous for the drivers as well, because you have no way of knowing how good the grip is going to be, especially on the first lap of rainy conditions. You have no idea about how much grip you're going to have, and especially being Jean-Eric Vergne, who doesn't even have the advantage of seeing other people going into these corners ahead of him, and not having the chance of kind of copying their driving style and their braking points. So that was very not dangerous, but very tricky and very fun to watch as well.
Well managed. Yeah, and I was on the edge of my seat, which is what you want watching motorsport. You want to be on the edge of your seat, and I definitely was for those final 2 laps. So yeah, as I said, Evans then, so Vergne first, Evan was second, and then we had Sebastian Buemi, home race, picking up podium. Really good for him.
Really good, yeah. And especially after all all Nissan had to go through in these last few days, with them basically having to throw away their Season 6 setup. They were obviously planning on continuing on with their twin MGU, but now they're having to revert back to the single motor setup, and operationally and administratively, that's a big challenge for the team. So, and especially looking back at their last few races, they've always been lightning quick in qualifying, but then didn't seem to have too much efficiency in the race. And Oliver Rowland was very disappointing in the other Nissan, and he retired after contact with the wall halfway through the race. And basically we didn't hear anything about Ollie all weekend. But in spite of Nissan's efficiency problems, Buemi finishing on the podium, that's very good for the team, very good for him as well. Obviously, the home hero, he was able to bring his son up to the podium as well, which was very great to see, and just very deserved for Nissan Edams.
And then we had Andre Lotterer. Now I feel sorry for Andre Lotterer, because he crossed the line in fourth. Great race, fantastic. Made some great overtaking moves. And to be fair, another driver that really and truly shone this week in the race. But he was caught up in that first corner incident where he had to come in and change his front nose cone. And obviously the red flag was called, and he went into the pits to fix it, but it was the wrong thing to do. But then there was the red light at the end of the pit lane. So he crossed that red line, which is obviously it's a massive no-no. So the penalty is really it stands. But I suppose if he could have waited for the FIA to give him the nod. Okay, you can go and wait at the end of the pit lane. But I think with all the craziness, I think he just drove through because he realised, I shouldn't be in the pit lane. They can't touch. I need to go here. So he drove there. And then after an amazing drive to finish in fourth place and to keep his championship hopes alive, again, another driver in the championship fight, and he gets stumped with a drive-through penalty equivalent to 22 seconds after the race, which dropped him outside the points, which then promoted Sam Bird into fourth place. Tobias, what do you think about Andre Lotterer?
I have to say, and I'm really sorry that I have to say so, but I fully agree with the penalty because he was very conscious about it, and we spoke to him after the race, and he argued that it was his team advising him to just continue on. Obviously, you're supposed to be entering the pit lane once a red flag is called, but the drivers were not able to enter the pit lane because the track was blocked in the chicane. And that's the reason we first were going to the start straight, and once the chicane had been cleared, the drivers were directed by the safety car into the pit lane. And Lotterer did the reasonable thing and sensible thing, and the thing you're supposed to be doing. He entered the pits and then heard the message from Scott Elkins to stay out on track and line up on the starting grid. Which was unfortunate for him, obviously. But he asked his team what he was supposed to do, and his team advised him to just skip the red light and continue on. So he was very conscious about his behavior there, and as you say, passing a red light is a major no-no in normal everyday traffic as well as in racing. You just don't do that. And you learn that in karting and in junior formula single-seater championships. It's a no-no. Don't pass a red light at the pit exit. But he did so nevertheless and was very conscious about it, as I say. Unfortunate, of course, and I understand the thought of the team making the job of the race direction a bit easier and all of that. But, the penalty was deserved in my eyes.
Definitely, and which then it just, as I said, it dropped him out of the championship. Out of the championship points, which makes it even more harder for him.
Yeah,
going into New
kind
York.
Of dropped him out of the championship hunt as well.
So you're looking now as a Degrassi, but Degrassi's 32 points behind, I believe it is.
Yep.
So, with 58 points to go, it could be wrapped up. The championship could be Verne's. come the first race and the Saturday race in New York.
I don't want to say anything wrong, but I think Verne only needs 5th now in the Saturday race of New York to seal his championship.
It's crazy.
So not yeah.
It's crazy how it's been so close for so long, and it's just extended and it's just gone, and all of a sudden it's like it's so in one person's control.
He's just been fantabulous in these last 3 races. He won.
Yeah, he has been brilliant.
He won Monaco. He was on the podium in Berlin. Won Switzerland again this year. Just amazing 3 races, and the others didn't have great days in Switzerland. And I was saying heading into this weekend, these 5 championship contenders we had before Switzerland, they needed perfect races now. They weren't allowed to make any mistakes if they wanted to have their championship hopes still staying alive. And De Grassi had a terrible qualifying. Lotterer had the penalty. Who else? Felix da Costa finished outside of the points. And let's not talk about Robin Freins because he had a terrible day being spun out on lap 1 by Jerome D'Ambrosio, obviously. So De Grassi took 2 points. He finished in P9 after the penalty against Lotterer, and he's still second in the championship, but a long way off. And realistically speaking, it's pretty much only Jeff left. It's his championship to lose now, is it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. So then we had Maximilian Günther, who capped off an amazing weekend in 5th, with Daniel Abt 6th, and now Alex Lynn, a little tiny bit on him before we go. 7th. Now, he's done such a great job since he's been back. He's been a bit unlucky in some races, but like if Jaguar are ready for that second seat, and if that's still, not Alex's, then, if you're another team, Alex Lynn's a good punt. He's done brilliant since he's been
Absolutely, yep. His future isn't safe at Jaguar. We should add that. Mitch Evans is very much set, and I don't think it's been announced officially, but it's common knowledge in the paddock that Mitch Evans is going to stay on with Jaguar for another year. But Alex Lynn, as you rightly say, had a fantastic run and really learned quickly and adapted quickly to the Gen 2 car, which he hadn't driven before Rome. The shakedown in Rome was the first time he's ever been in any Gen 2 car. He's not been involved in the development, as far as I'm concerned, of this year's Jaguar, or any other car for that matter, because Virgin obviously were Virgin are a customer team of Audi now. So as far as I'm concerned, Lynn didn't have any mile whatsoever under his belt in any Gen 2 car before Rome, and he really was quick to learn. And now his second points finish, I think, or his first points finish.
Yeah.
No, his second points finish, and should have been his third points finish, because of his
Paris
and Berlin as well
being taken out.
So his fourth points finish. Then it should have been his fourth.
So as I said, he's had a bit of bad luck, but when he's put it together, he's put it together. So you know, I'd be surprised if Jaguar don't sign him up. I think if Jaguar don't sign him, it's because Lynn's got Aston Martin plans or something else is occupying Lynn.
James Calado.
Because
how about him? He is testing for the team. He's a good.
I think that would be good. I think James Calado has really come out. You know, because obviously after that GP2 sort of era, he went a bit quiet, and obviously he's done really well in the WEC series with Ferrari. But I think like his value has risen dramatically, and his publicity he seems to be more everywhere and doing more things.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that'd be just as good for James Calado. But I think Alex Lynn deserves a shot. You know, he's doing a good job now. Like you can't always take that away from someone when they're doing a good job and punish them for giving someone else a debut. If I was someone else, if I was another team member and I saw Alex Lynn on the chopping list, I'd be like, I'll take him.
Yep.
But rounding out top 10, we had Felipe Massa in 8th. Lucas Di Grassi capping off a really disappointing day. Yes, getting in the points was good, but 9th is not where he wanted, with John Eric Vergne picking up 28 points, pole, and the race win. And then Stoffel Van Dorn picking up the last solitary point in 10th. So before we leave, to keep Dan happy, we didn't even mention Dan. Dan is not here with us. Did you realise? I hope you realised that he wasn't here with us. He hasn't just been sitting in the corner and we've just completely ignored him for the whole podcast. He wasn't here, but he will be back. His house is under a bit of construction, so that stopped him from doing the podcast. But he will be back, definitely, to New York. So fingers crossed. So, driver of the day, to keep Dan happy, because I know Dan, you're listening, and I know you'll be screaming at us if we don't do this. So, driver of the day, Tobias.
It would have to be Mitch Evans, right? Had a fantastic race. Maybe, is it driver of the day or the driver of the race? Because my driver of the race was Mitch Evans, but my driver of the day was Max Günther.
Okay, yeah, I get your understand, but I don't know, it's just called driver of the day, isn't it?
Okay, so I'll go for Mitch Evans then. If it's the driver of the race, then
I think there's loads that you could actually give it for. Vern's really easy, and probably Vergne deserves it, but I'm not going to give it to Vergne. Okay, I'm going to be controversial. He got a penalty, but I'm going to give it to Andre Lotterer because, I don't know, I just thought, yes, he had the extra bit of energy during that race, but he managed that race really well. He pulled off some good moves. He made Sam Bern make a mistake. Like, that's hard to do in himself just by applying the pressure. Moved forward. And I thought really, despite the penalty, overlooking the penalty, did a really good race and was just unfortunate. Yes, he committed, racing suicide in a sense by crossing a red line. And really that might not make him driver of the day and I might make him, dumb of the day. But I watching that race, I was really impressed with Andre Lotterer. I was impressed with a lot of drivers. Maxi Gunther, as you said, I was really impressed with John Eric Vergne. Sebastian Buemi, even though he didn't move anywhere technically, he drove a good race. So, but I think Andre Lotterer is where I'll go.
All right, I'll take Andre Lotterer as well. I'm still sticking with Mitch Evans, but I see where you're coming from with Andre Lotterer. And he was a big dark horse in this race. And as you say, he had a lot of energy left going into these last few corners. And he could have gone flat out for the last few laps. And that really made him very, very dangerous. And he was in contention for the win, obviously, right up until maybe the last chicane. So it's a good pick.
Yeah, you have to go different. You can't say Vergne every week. I know he's brilliant. But you can't. It's just boring. Okay, and we don't do boring. We try not to do boring in race. If you're still listening, on our race driver of the day, whatever it's called, Dan knows what it's called. But anyway, thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for. We've really enjoyed it. We've got the final episode of the season will be New York. We will, fingers crossed, be able to do some sort of stuff in the off season, looking at some news, driver changes, testing. So we won't keep the podcast null until season 6. There's still be plenty to talk about. But thank you so much also for the lovely comments that we're getting on YouTube, social media, on the comment sections. It's really great to see that you're enjoying the podcast. If you are enjoying the podcast and you're listening on YouTube, give it a like. That helps massively. If you could subscribe on YouTube as well, that's growing. The channel's growing massively, and all three of us are really delighted with that. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any other form of podcast app, we're on tons. We're on some I've never even heard of before, but it's great. Please, just give us a review. Gets it out to more Formula E fans. Get out to more motorsport fans in general who's just interested in Formula E. It makes the difference. There's also a Patreon, which we don't really like to shout too much about. But if you love us so much, if you really love listening to me talk, if you really love the fantastic German tones that is Tobias Bloom, then, you can just donate just a little bit of money. And that helps, improves our podcast setup. It helps improve content and ideas, and just helps the website grow, helps us out massively. So if you're feeling generous, maybe as a birthday present, That's so cheeky. But anyway, scrap that. Don't worry, you didn't hear that. If you feel so inclined, and if you do, we'll be so generous and we'll give you a massive shout out on the podcast and so forth, and maybe send you some formulary goodies if we have some in the office somewhere. But thank you so much for listening. We will be back for the New York E3 in just under a month's time now. So we look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye bye.